Hello, Joe here from Infiniti of Tacoma. Today I'm going to talk about the FX and QX70 series. Really cool vehicles. One of my favorite series of vehicles that Infiniti has made. I've been with Infiniti a little over 16 years, and it's one of my favorite products. Here we have a 2016 Infiniti QX70, and then next to it we have this 2008 Infiniti Fx35. Eventually the Fx35 evolved into the QX series. The Fx35 is a really revolutionary vehicle. Today, you know, crossover SUVs are very popular. Every manufacturer pretty much offers them now, and for a lot of manufacturers, they sell more crossovers than they do regular cars. Things are a little bit different back in 2002, 2003 when the 2003 FX first came out. It was pretty revolutionary because instead of like a body-on-frame truck, which back in the day most SUVs were built on truck-based architecture, the FX was based off the Nissan 370Z sports car platform. So it combined a lot of things. It was you had the high-up commanding view of a regular sport utility vehicle. You had extra cargo space, all-wheel drive, but being built on a sports car platform and its beautiful curvaceous body, it offered a performance car driving experience. So it combined, the utility and practicality of an SUV. It's a luxury vehicle, and it's a performance vehicle. So the FX was one of the first in the segment. We've seen other vehicles kind of pop up. We have the Porsche Cayenne, the BMW X5. Now we have the Jaguar F-Pace. The FX was one of the first ones. If it wasn't for the FX, we might not have had all these other performance, crossovers. The Porsche Macan. I can go on and on. The FX was one of the first, and I still think is one of the best crossovers out there. Then, so the FX series was made in 2003. Was the first model year of the FX series. This particular one is a 2008. 2008 is actually the last year of this generation of the FX. From 2003 to 2008, there's a few mild changes here and there, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same vehicle. Again, slight differences. Then in 2009, they redesigned the FX series, and it looked a lot like the QX series. So in 2009, they came out with the FX35 and the FX50. Before, you had the FX35 and you had the FX45. So the FX35 had a 3.5 liter V6 that made 280 horsepower, or you could get it with a 4.5 liter V8. That was the FX45, featuring a 315 horsepower V8. In 2009, the FX was redesigned, and it pretty much has a similar body style to the QX70, and you could get the FX35, which had a 3.5 liter V6, but it was bumped up to about 300 horsepower from 280 horsepower, or you get this really cool 5 liter V8, which made 390 horsepower. Most people would opt for the V6. We would sell a lot more V6s. The V8 version of the FX and the QX series is pretty hard to find, but if you can find them, people like them a lot. So we had the FX35, and then we had the FX50. Then in 2013, Infiniti changed it up a little bit. They increased the size of the 3.5 liter V6 to 3.7 liters. So they changed the name to FX37 because at the time the Infiniti name was tied to the size of the engine, 3.5 liters or 3,500 cubic centimeters, and they increased it to 3.7 liters or 3,700 cubic centimeters. So it became the FX37. Horsepower went up from 300 horsepower to 325 horsepower. So we had the FX37 for 2013. The FX50 stayed the same. They didn't change the engine at all. Then in 2014, Infiniti confused a lot of people. They kind of revamped all their model names. We had a new leader at Infiniti, and he decided that we should throw out all the Infiniti names and kind of reinvent them. So they got rid of the FX series completely, and then it became the QX70. And it didn't matter what size of the engine. If you got the QX70 with a V6, it was a QX70 3.7. or if you got the QX70 with the V8, it was a QX70 5.0. And from 2014 to 2017, when the QX70 was dropped, pretty much no changes. A 2014 QX70 or a 2013 FX37 for that matter is going to look pretty much identical to a 2017 QX70. They did offer some packages later on, like they offered a limited package, a sport package, things like that. But the nuts and bolts of it, the interior layout, the design, is pretty much the same from 2009 to 2017. It's really a great product. I'm kind of sad that Infiniti dropped the QX70 in 2017. It was aging. It did need some improvements to compete with the competition. It's getting long in the tooth, I must admit that. But with the new QX55 that's coming out, Infiniti actually took a lot of design themes from the FX series and the QX70s, and they applied that to the new QX55, which is based off of the new QX50 crossover, and it has kind of more of a streamlined, coupe-ish design theme, kind of like what we find on the FX series and the QX70 series. So with the FX35, this particular generation, this was made till 2008. It's getting a little bit harder to find nice pre-owned ones, just with how old they're getting. But if you can find one, they're fantastic products. I actually did a video recently of one we took in on trade that had 300,000 miles on it. And it still ran great. You can watch that video on our YouTube page. This one has 146,000 miles. And a lot of times when we have vehicles that come in on trade, like this one with 146,000 miles, we're going to send them to auction. They just generally have a little bit too many problems. But Infinitis are pretty reliable, especially the ones that are made in Japan like this. And this one we were able to put through our service department, and we deemed it in good enough condition to sell on our used car lot. That's not perfect. For instance, we have these. Don't worry, it's not contagious. So obviously all vehicles have their shortcomings, and one shortcoming of the FX series is that when they developed the dashboard, however they developed it, it does not do great with heat and direct sunlight. And it's not all of them that are like this, and some are worse than others. Some just bubble a little bit, some are actually worse. But you know, it is what it is. And obviously it is kind of an eyesore. An easy fix for this is to put a dash cover on it, and it's not going to make it go away, but you can get a cheap dash cover and it's going to cover up those things, versus having to replace this whole dashboard. I think it would be like $3,000. It's really not cost effective. So, but point being is, I wouldn't let something like this stop you from buying a great vehicle like this. Obviously you can cover it up with a dash cover. But these are really reliable vehicles, and as I mentioned before, I've seen them go past 300,000 miles. Lots of great features on the FX series, FX35, FX45. Was kind of ahead of its time as far as the layout goes. You kind of feel like you're in a cocoon almost. You have these high window sills. It's kind of a vehicle that you feel like it's kind of wrapped around you, versus, you know, having a vehicle that you kind of feel like you're in a fishbowl, where like you're of all these windows, everyone can see you. You feel really exposed. I like the FX series because I kind of, like I said, I feel wrapped in a cocoon. I feel like I'm kind of inside this little spaceship, and it gives me a nice, cozy, comfortable feeling. The steering wheel on the FX is pretty much the same steering wheel that you find in the 350, 370Z. Kind of hints that it actually shares its platform, its rear-wheel drive based platform, with the 350, 370Z. The FX series had some pretty cool features that you didn't find on vehicles. Like, for instance, look at this tilt gauge cluster. The whole gauge cluster tilts up and down with the steering wheel, and that's so the steering wheel will never obstruct the gauges. A pretty cool feature. You know, Infiniti offered that for a little while on some of their products, and eventually they did away with it. For a transmission, you have a 5-speed automatic transmission, and you have manual shift mode. The FX also has a backup camera. This is actually one of the first production vehicles to have a backup camera. This one isn't fully loaded, but this is also one of the first production vehicles to have like adaptive cruise control and lane departure warning, things like that. The QX70 is built on the same sports car platform as the FX. It's the same advanced front midship platform that they use on the 350Z and 370Z. This platform is also used on other Infiniti products like the Infiniti G35, coupe and sedan, the G37 coupe and sedan, even the Q50, Q60, and the Q70 sedan. They're all built on this advanced front midship platform. And the reason why they call it the advanced front midship platform is they take the engine and they place it as far back behind the front axle as possible so the center of gravity is towards the middle of the vehicle. That helps it rotate on its axis and gives it as close to perfect weight distribution as possible. So going into the interior of the QX70, obviously it's a little bit more up-to-date versus the FX35. It's a little bit more of a modern looking interior. And again, the steering wheel that you see here is very similar. It's almost exactly the same steering wheel that you get in the 370Z. Again, because this shares its platform with the 370Z. Some features that you could get on the new FX/QX70 that you couldn't get in the old one, for instance, is heated and cooled front seats. And then they offered more safety features, intelligent brake assist, forward collision warning, forward emergency braking. Those all became available on the redesigned FX from 2009 and up, and eventually the QX70, which is evolved into, or had its name changed to, in 2014. You also have a little bit larger screen with the infotainment system versus the FX, a little bit better resolution. You have this nice 360 overhead camera. That was a new feature that you could get on the redesigned FX/QX70 that wasn't available on the old FX. And in fact, it's another first, is Infiniti was one of the first companies to have a 360 overhead camera like that. Infiniti has always kind of been a pioneer of technology. This one is very well equipped with features. It has the deluxe touring package, which gives you upgraded interior trim, upgraded semi-inline leather seats, larger wheel and tire package. This, as you can see, doesn't have this tilt gauge cluster like you had in the FX. I think it was just a little bit too costly for Infiniti to produce in the vehicles, having that added complexity of a tilt gauge cluster. And they probably didn't see much upside in installing that added cost to the vehicle versus, you know, its appeal to buyers and all that stuff. So, you know, sometimes the bean counters will win in situations like that. It's unfortunate that they dropped that feature, but, you know, as you can see, you can still pretty much, depending on how tall you are, the gauges can get obstructed. So you can kind of see how it was kind of an ingenious idea. Too bad it didn't stick. This one has a keyless ignition with push button start. It pretty much became standard on the redesigned FX. Or on the older FX series, you could have the keyless ignition with the technology package. You can see the design, pretty much the whole design of the FX was pretty much mirrored and updated with the QX70. It pretty much follows the same design theme. They didn't want to break, they didn't want to fix what wasn't broken. It was a nice looking vehicle, as the proportions were right, so they just kind of improved in certain areas. The engines are very similar, so it's pretty much the same engine, the VQ series, the VQ35 versus the VQ37. They took the same basic engine architecture and they increased the size. It went from 3.5 liters to 3.7 liters, 280 horsepower versus 325 horsepower. These are great engines, low maintenance. You have a maintenance-free timing chain, so you never need to worry about the cost replacement of timing belts. So those timing chains are zero maintenance and are designed to last the service life of the engine about 300,000 miles. So which one would be better for you? Well, it's all a matter of personal preference. Maybe you like the way the FX looks, or maybe you like the way the QX70 looks. As far as prices go, the QX70s and the FX35s that were redesigned from 2009 and later, and FX50, those are going to be at a higher price point because they're newer versus the older FX series. So maybe if you're looking for something that's priced around $10,000 or under, you're probably going to be looking at an FX35, but it's going to be older technology. It's probably going to have higher miles. If you're looking for a newer vehicle, something that's still under warranty, something that's off lease, maybe one owner, it's going to be a lot easier to find a QX70 in that situation versus the older FX series. They're both great vehicles. They have both been proven to be very reliable. Those pimples on the dashboard is not an issue with the QX70. I have not seen one QX70 with that issue. They fixed that, so from 2009 and on, you don't have to worry about the dashboard issues. So it's pretty much from just the first generation of the FX that we saw that. So what are some other trouble areas on these vehicles to look at? They actually are really reliable vehicles. I'd say probably out of all the Infiniti products, the more modern Infiniti products, I'd say these are probably some of the best built, most reliable ones. But they do have a few weak areas. I guess something to look for if you're shopping for any one of these vehicles is a pretty common issue to happen is to have a leaking steering rack. If a steering rack's leaking a little bit, if there's a little bit of seepage, usually it's not a big deal. But if it's starting to drip on the ground, then you could lose power steering fluid. That can be a problem. And a new steering rack is not cheap. Depending if you go, aftermarket, or you get a brand new one installed at a dealership, it could be anywhere from $1,500 to over $3,000 for a new steering rack. Aside from that, the only other area where we've seen issues is subframes. These have fluid-filled subframes. So subframes kind of is part of the vehicle that helps connect the suspension components and the wheels and stuff to the unibody. And they have bolts that will start leaking that fluid. So they have fluid in these subframes to help reduce vibration. It does a great job, but those subframe bolts will start leaking and that fluid will start leaking out. So that will prevent it from doing its job of reducing vibration. It's not really a safety issue, it's kind of more of a noise, vibration, and harshness issue. Honestly, I've driven vehicles with leaking subframes and without a leaking subframe, and I really have a hard time telling the difference. So it wouldn't stop me from buying a vehicle. I have a 2005 G35, its subframe is not leaking, but if it does, I'm not going to spend the $4,000 to fix it. I'm just going to, let it seep a little bit and then deal with maybe a little bit more vibrations and harshness. So overall, those are really the two weak areas with these vehicles if you're looking for one. And the steering rack is really the one that's a big problem. The leaking subframe is something that's kind of more up to your personal preference. Like I said, it wouldn't be something that would be concerning to me. If you have any other questions about the FX or the QX70 series, please share your questions in the comment section. We'll be happy to answer them. These are great vehicles. As a 16-year veteran of Infiniti, it's one of my favorites. I highly recommend them. And overall, I think it's a great combination of a vehicle that's practical. It's got lots of cargo space. It's got all-wheel drive. You have a high upcoming view of the road, but it's also very fun to drive. It's beautiful. It's luxurious. It's got really nice creature comforts. It's a really pleasant driving vehicle, and it's also very reliable. And in my opinion, it has one of the best engines that you can get. And actually, I would like to add a little bit to that. So for overall durability, I would recommend the V6. The V6 just has a little bit better track record for longevity than the V8. I've seen plenty of these V6 engines go 200, 300,000 miles. I've seen the V8s get up there in miles too, but just in my, I've seen more issues develop with the V8s like around 150,000 miles than I have the V6. So if you can find the V8, if you love it and it runs great, awesome. But if you want the best engine that's going to have the least amount of issues and last the longest, I'd either go for the 3.5 liter V6 or the 3.7 liter V6. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. Hope to see you soon and have a wonderful day.